Yesterday I talked about anger and the difference between unconscious anger that we act out and lash out on other people, and conscious anger, which is really about communicating the feeling of anger as an emotion. So I want to go a little bit deeper into it today, and I want to go to what's often underneath the anger, because as I described in my video yesterday, that anger tends to be the symptom. It tends to be at the surface, and it's the messenger to what's actually lying underneath it, which is our sadness, pain, and essentially wounding. So the question is, well, what triggers our anger? And triggers are basically reactions that we have that are in relationship to our wound. And most of the time, our wounding, our pain even, or our sadness, and most especially our anger, is unconscious. We're not aware of it. We haven't yet made it aware because it's something that's deeply ingrained in us from a very young age, from when we were little. And so really, we're just replaying patterns unconsciously until we stop and we do the inner work and we look at it consciously. And once we make something conscious, then we can shift it, because we can make a different choice, and we can essentially go to the place within us that has an unmet need, and we can give ourselves that need, and that has a profound ripple effect, domino effect. So, but what is the trigger? The trigger is something that is being activated that reminds us of the pain of our wound. And the thing about wounding that is so, I was thinking about it today, what's so kind of heartbreaking about our human condition sometimes and our wounding is it's not our fucking fault. It's just not. And the thing is it's really, there is no culprit really, because you can say, okay, my wounding comes from my father. My wounding comes from my mother. But, you know, what was their childhood like? And what was their parents' childhood like? And what was their parents' childhood like? And, you know, you could go down the line of history and go, well, who started it, right? And it's impossible to say. But basically what ends up happening is we have these generational traumas that we pass down, parent to child, parent to child, parent to child, until a person stops and goes, okay, I'm going to do the conscious work to heal this so I don't hand it over to my child. And every parent that does that, it's not like all of a sudden you're like, ding, magic wand, like the whole generational trauma has just disappeared. But every generation that works on it, it lessens and it becomes weaker and weaker. So to the point that hopefully we're not passing it on, and it's not as potent and as strong. But for now, it exists. And on top of that, we have a collective wounding, you know, as just a human species. And it's heavy, it's deep, right? But the sad thing is just like, you know, we can point towards that's my wounding, but can we blame that person for it? You know, not really, because they're human themselves and they have their own wounding. But it's really important to recognize, well, what is my wounding? And to recognize what the story of that wounding is, but then to step out of the story. Because unfortunately what happens is we experience pain when we're a child, and then we create a story around it. And oftentimes that story is actually false. It might kind of obviously be in relationship to what we experience, but we tend to make a false story about what we believe about ourselves. And the child takes everything personal. So everything is about, well, I must not be lovable. Something must be wrong with me. I'm not wanted. You know, it's very personal to us, whereas often it's the circumstance. So I'll give you a few examples. One, so for me, my wounding, my belief system was I'm abandoned. My father abandoned me. And, you know, I do have memories of being 2-3 years old with him, and he was never present. Even when I was staying with him, because when I was 2.5, my mom left him. They separated. And I remember being in the house by myself, or being in the car by myself, and thinking, isn't he meant to be the adult here? Like, he's not taking care of me. But when I was 3.5, we escaped, literally escaped, and left the country, and I never saw him again, because he was not an okay man. And the 4-year-old me, you know, goes, oh, one day my father is there and the next he's not. And unfortunately, it wasn't really explained to me what was going on. And I have to say, children understand in their own way, and we've got to communicate the truth to them, because otherwise they will make a story. So my story was my father abandoned me, and that's not actually the truth, because the truth is we left him because we had to leave him because it was not a safe place to be. So I made this whole story that men abandon, or more men aren't reliable, or they're, you can't depend on them, or, a whole story. And then, other situations in my life maybe reflected that back to me. But until you stop and go, wait, but is that true? Is that true now? Right? So when I was, fast forward to my mid-20s, when I was in a really solid relationship with a really good guy with a kind heart who's honest and loyal and just a good man. And I was replaying this stuff, and I had to really stop and go, but is he going to abandon me? Is he going to lie and cheat on me? Like, no, he's not. So I'm like, do I need to keep on playing this story again? And I made the conscious choice to no, it's not pertinent. It's not true in this moment anymore. So the thing about our wounds is they come from an experience that was real. The story that we made about it might not be real, but the feeling was real, but we're reliving and reenacting that pain over and over and over again, and it just doesn't serve us, because as adults we can take care of ourselves. But the issue is it's the inner child that is still playing out that wounding. So this is why it's so important to understand what our triggers are, because they lead us to the wound, and the wound is what's really, really needing our loving attention. And, at the core of it, it might bring up all of this anger and sadness and rage and resentment, and we might want to blame our parents for it, but really to come to the place of processing all of that, it's not about ignoring it. It's really feel it. And often what happens in a session is the client might be really upset and angry with their parent, but they don't fully let themselves feel that, because there's also the loyalty, right? Oh, but they were my parent and I love them. Of course. You can love them and hate them in the same moment. You can love them and be angry. You can love them and go, shit, that really hurt me, So, there's so many other examples that I can give you of things. So one thing that can happen is that, let's say, I had a client whose parents, they kind of stayed together for the child. A lot of parents do that. They think, oh, that's the best thing to do. And actually what can happen is the child then feels this huge pressure and responsibility that's oh, it's my fault that they're together and they're unhappy. They're unhappy because of me, so it's my job to make them happy. And the thing is that where the child doesn't have the space to reflect upon themselves, to go, oh, this isn't about me, So when we go to, I was abandoned because, let's go back to my situation, because my father wasn't present. It's not because I, Corinne, am not worthy and good enough and lovable enough. It was because my father didn't have the capacity to be present. Children that feel unwanted, that let's say they were given up for adoption, their core belief might be, something must be so wrong with me. I am so unlovable and so insignificant that my mother would give me away to someone. The ultimate rejection, right? But the thing is, it wasn't about that being. You know what I mean? It wasn't about that person. Called them Jane. It wasn't about Jane. It was that the mother didn't have the capacity to take care of her as a child. She might have wanted to keep Jane, but she couldn't keep a baby in her life because she was 15 years old. I'm just making a story up, yeah? But Jane takes it personal. Jane thinks it's about me, Jane. I'm rejected. I'm not wanted. I don't belong here. I'm not worthy. And then she'll play out that story in her life and in her relationships, when it's actually Jane's mother was too young to have a child. And she couldn't handle, taking care of a child. Maybe didn't even want to get pregnant and it was an accident. And the child feels that, but it's not personal to that being. It's more the circumstance. And so this is why, again, it's so important to recognize that our stories are not true. The pain is true, right? The pain was there. And that's why my perspective is it's not about analyzing the story. You can, it's helpful to understand where things come from and why and what was the dynamic, and you look at all the different angles. But at the end of the day, the healing happens in the body, in the emotion, in the sensation, in the feeling, because that's where the initial hurt and the initial wound happened. It wasn't a mental thing. We couldn't even understand what was going on as children. It was a physical, emotional experience, and that's what gets imprinted. Trauma, pain gets imprinted into our body. It gets stored in our cellular memory. And so we have to go to those places within ourselves to create the healing. And ultimately, again, what these things need is just our loving attention. So, if you're dealing with anger or if you're dealing with anxiety, look at what's underneath it all. There's sadness, there's pain, and we live in a society that wants to avoid pain at all costs. Whether it's alcohol, marijuana, harder drugs, food, sex, television, we avoid pain. And pain is the portal. We have got to walk into the pain with love, to the wound, give ourselves what we need, and then I'm telling you, your whole life transforms. So this is the process, and just start to plant the seeds of curiosity to understand, why am I being triggered? And be kind to yourself, so kind to yourself. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's no one's fault at the end of the day. Some people, they're so wounded that they can be malicious and manipulative and violent, but even they are just deeply, deeply wounded, and they really need help. But we all do. We all need support, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's an act of self-love and self-care, and it's liberating. It really is. You walk into the shadow and you will find your liberation. So, and if you're interested and you need guidance, I'm here for that, should that resonate. And take it or leave it, as always, and loving you from afar. Bye.